So starting off with the external structures, we can notably see the shark's fusiform body shape. This allows for it to travel great distances at a heightened speed. The shark has an assortment of fins, such as the anterior dorsal fin and the slightly smaller posterior dorsal fin, the pectoral fins, which help to keep the shark buoyant, the pelvic fins, and the caudal fin, which is a portion of the shark's heteroceral tail. This means that the tail is essentially divided into a dorsal and ventral lobe. All of these fins serve to aid the shark in buoyancy and locomotion. Down the side of its body, the shark has a lateral line, which has multiple pores that lead to receptors, and these receptors have the ability to sense changes in pressures when the shark is underwater. Moving up to the face, we see the rostrum, which is a pointed snout that the shark often uses to bump into its surroundings. There's also a pair of nostrils and a set of eyes, which are obviously used for the basic functions of scent and sight, and we'll go more in depth on that later in the video. Finally, we see the spherical openings. These lead into the mouth, and they have the function of intaking water for respiration. So here we have a close-up picture of the rostrum, in which we can clearly see tiny pores, which I've circled in red. These pores are called ampullae of Lorenzini, and they're essentially mucus-filled pores that serve as a special sensing organ that can sense changes in the electric fields. It's almost like a sixth sense for the sharks. Here's a close-up picture of the cloacal opening, which is located between the pelvic fins of the shark. This basically just receives the products from the intestine along with the urinary and genital ducts of the shark. So as we can see from this labeled image, this is a close-up picture of the shark's eye. It has an overlay of a transparent cornea, which protects the eye as a whole. A prominent iris is also visible, along with the centered pupil. These serve for the basic function of sight, of course. And finally, a nictitating membrane resides inside of the lower lid of the shark's eye, and this just also serves to protect the cornea.
Starting off, we have the lateral line. Okay, and then we have the cloacal opening between the pelvic fins. Okay, then we've got the anterior dorsal fin on the top. Kind of folded, but whatever. Then we got the caudal fin. Okay, beautiful. And we have pectoral fins. Those are the pectoral fins. We also got pelvic fins. Right back there. We have rostrum, which has nostrils and a mouth. And also ampullae of Lorenzini. And then the eyes, and those have irises inside of them. And what slides over the eyes is a nictitating membrane, which you can't see right now. And then we got a spherical opening, are located posterior and dorsal to the eyes. And then right next to that should be gill slits on the side of the shark. And that's all.
In this image, we can see the digestive tract of the dogfish. At the rightmost side, we see the esophagus, which connects the oral cavity and pharynx to the stomach. It is enlarged because there was still an entire fish within the esophagus while we were dissecting the shark. Next, we see the stomach, which aids in food digestion. That leads to the duodenum, which connects the stomach to the intestine. The shark's intestine directs food through the gut and into the colon, which empties out waste into the cloaca. Here is a close-up image of the shark's stomach. The internal walls of the stomach are made up of the mucosa, which is the inner lining, and the rugae, which are the longitudinal folds that aid in mixing up the food with digestive juices. The pyloric sphincter, which regulates the passage of partially digested foods into the intestines, is also visible. Here's just a close-up look of the opened esophagus and stomach where the fish was still digesting. Here's a picture of the liver, which is the largest organ in the shark's body and produces bile that is essential to digesting fats, storing energy, and giving the shark buoyancy. And also the gallbladder, which is the middle lobe of the liver that stores the bile. This is a picture of some of the other major parts of the shark's digestive system. The peritoneum is a shiny membrane lining the body wall from which the organs are dorsally suspended from. The bile duct carries bile from the liver to the duodenum. The valvular intestine is the larger portion of the shark's intestine, and it encases the spiral valve, which adds surface area for digestion and absorption. Finally, we see the colon and the cloaca, which aid in releasing waste out of the cloacal opening.
At the top, we have the esophagus, which leads into the stomach. And then from the stomach, it takes a little U-turn in the duodenum, which then leads to the intestine. And that whole big thing is the intestine, all the way to the very end, which at the very end is the colon, that right there.
In this image, we see the pancreas, which secretes digestive enzymes into the pancreatic duct, and the spleen, which stores red and white blood cells.
All right, what we have here is the pancreas, and it is right near the duodenum in the lower stomach, and it secretes digestive enzymes of the pancreas, and they go to the duodenum, and then there's a spleen, which is on the bottom, and although the spleen is closely associated with all the digestive organs. However, its primary function is to store red and white blood cells.
Here's a close-up of the external gill slits, which aid as the shark's respiratory organs. Within these 5 internal gill slits, there are gill pouches, gill rakers, which strain food particles to stop them from exiting the pharynx through the gill slits, the bronchial bars, which are the partitions between the gill pouches that support the gills, and the blood vessel-coated gill filaments. Here is a close-up of the shark's mouth. The oral cavity is the entire area that is enclosed within the jaws and throat. Within it, we see 3 rows of sharp teeth, which are essential because the shark is prone to losing teeth from bumping into things with its rostrum. There is a tongue, but it is nearly immobile. The oral cavity leads to the pharynx, which then narrows into the esophagus. Here is a close-up of the shark's spiracle. It's one of the 2 openings in the anterior roof of the pharynx. It is used for the intake of water into the pharynx and to the gills. To conclude this section, we have the heart. It is located within the pericardial cavity, which is circled in red. This cavity can be compared to the much larger peritoneal cavity, which encompasses all of the shark's digestive organs. The pericardium is the membrane that lines the inner walls of this cavity. The heart is made up of 2 chambers, the atrium and the larger muscular ventricle. The atrium collects and pumps blood into the ventricle, and the ventricle can then pump blood to the gills and throughout the entire body before the blood returns back to the heart. In this image, we see the kidneys, which aid in the transportation of urine. In female sharks, the kidney's anterior section is essentially functionless, while in males, it serves as an essential part of the reproductive system. Our shark, however, was a female, which is seen by the uterus, oviducts, and ovaries. The ovaries store eggs for the female shark, while the oviduct runs along the side of the shark and eventually enlarges into the uterus, where the fertilized eggs develop into embryos. This is just a picture of one of the pups that was inside of our shark, and then in the lower right-hand corner you can see the opened up uterus. Finally, we move on to the shark's brain. We are only able to open up a portion of the shark's brain within the time we had left in class, but as labeled, we can see that the brain breaks up into 3 distinctive portions: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. The forebrain contains a pair of olfactory bulbs, which are a collection of sensory cells that aid in sensing the stimuli of smells. It also contains the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. The midbrain contains 2 optic lobes, which are responsible for coordinating visual input. Finally, the hindbrain contains the cerebellum, which is perched atop the anterior part of the brainstem and is responsible for muscle coordination, and the medulla oblongata, which is in between the spinal column and the cerebellum and is responsible for muscular coordination, specifically when in response to sensory input.
Okay, what you can see here is just a little bit of the brain. You can't see the whole thing. I think this is the hindbrain, and then midbrain, and then we have the forebrain up here.